The playoff hopes for the Falcons took a major hit with Sunday's 31-13 loss to the San Francisco 49ers. Here to break it all down is ESPN's Falcons reporters, Mike Rothstein. Thank you so much for joining me.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Yeah, well, heading into week 16, the Falcons are 6-8 up against the Lions, who you used to cover. They've been struggling this year, but do you think they have a chance to salvage this playoff berth? Mathematically, it looks like it's possible, but we saw how they played.
Math says yes. Reality says no. I mean, that's just the truth of it, because you look at it, they pretty much have to win out to even have a chance to be still in this conversation, and that includes a trip to Buffalo. They played better on the road, but Buffalo is also a team fighting for a playoff berth, and frankly, they're a better team than the Falcons, rather. See, you messed me up there because I used to cover both those teams. But the Falcons, and what's happened there is this. When the Falcons have played teams that are clearly better than them, and we saw that Sunday against the 49ers, it doesn't go well. They have double-digit losses. Every team that they've played that's basically going to be a playoff team this year, they've lost to by double digits. Tampa Bay twice, San Francisco, Dallas, New England. That's just who they are. And listen, with the roster that they have, that's kind of what you thought. So is it possible they win out? Sure, because they also play at home against Detroit and New Orleans, but there's also this one little nice caveat. They haven't won at Mercedes-Benz Stadium this year. They have one home win, but that was in London at Tottenham Hotspur. So unless they want to move to London, which, I mean, sure, I guess, but I can't imagine they actually want to do that. They haven't won at home this year. That's something that theoretically they can remedy on Sunday. However, it seems like a long shot. And then you want to add on top of that, they already do not have tiebreakers against Washington, Philadelphia, and now the Niners. So that's three teams that are theoretically in the wild card hunt that automatically, if they have the same record, they're out. Minnesota has a better record in conference games, and likely, as long as the Vikings win one more game, they would have that tiebreaker as well. So it looks pretty slim for Atlanta to make the playoffs. But I think most people, if you told them at the beginning of the season they'd be without Calvin Ridley for most of the year, and they would still be in the playoff conversation come Christmas time, come potentially New Year's, I think most people would have taken that, understanding the salary cap constraints they were under and the first year under Arthur Smith and general manager Terry Fontenot.
Mm-hmm. And you also wrote about Russell Gage's emergence, coming at such a critical time, especially after he had a little bit of an inconsistent start. But with weapons like Pitts and Patterson, what led to him getting more looks?
I think it wasn't even more looks. I think it was just him getting healthy. He busted up his ankle in week 2 against Tampa Bay. He actually looked like he injured it twice in that game, missed the next 3 games, came back after the bye, and it was very hit or miss after that. And teams really started to kind of try and take him away. He had 2 out of 3 games at one stretch where he didn't catch a pass, which for a number 1 receiver, even though he wasn't supposed to be the number 1 receiver because of Calvin Ridley, most people thought he was going to be here, but now he is. That's unacceptable for a number 1 receiver. However, in the last month or so, he's been more involved in game plans, and that's been pretty clear because teams are taking away Kyle Pitts. Teams are starting to figure out how to defend Cordarrelle Patterson, and the Falcons are using Patterson more as a true running back than as the running back wide receiver hybrid that he was being used at more earlier in the season, although they're still using him in that role somewhat. So opportunities have been there for Gage, and it is coming at a good time for him, if not for the Falcons as well, because Russell Gage is a free agent after this year. And if you would ask me a month and a half ago, I would be like, oh man, Russell Gage has to go somewhere on a prove it deal because of how poorly he was playing. Now with the way he's been playing the last 4 weeks, he might be playing his way into at least a decent contract, whether that's in Atlanta or elsewhere come March or April.
Do you see him staying with Atlanta?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I say that because they have so many guys that they need to try and either re-sign or areas they need to fill. When you look at their roster, literally every position is a question mark at this point, from quarterback, which is what's going to happen with Matt Ryan either this year or do they start to figure out the future beyond Matt Ryan, all the way down to long snapper, Stephanie, where Josh Harris is an unrestricted free agent. But understand, most long snappers end up on 1-year deals. I would be surprised if Josh Harris wasn't back. But, I mean, that's the breadth of what they're dealing with. Right now, they have going into next season, minus futures contracts guys and minus exclusive rights free agents who basically they have right of first refusal. So, and most of those guys would be back. They have 27 guys on what would be a 90-man preseason roster. So they have holes to fill everywhere. And that includes the receiving core, where next year, the only guys under contract are Calvin Ridley and Frank Darby. Frank Darby, who barely scratches any sort of playing time as a receiver. I think he maybe ran a route or two last week in the blowout, and that's the only time he gets. So all of that is to say maybe, because it's going to matter on whether they feel that Russell Gage's emergence here later in the season is more of a sign of things to come versus a guy just kind of like, oh man, I need to make money in a contract, and B, whether or not they can afford him, because they have all these guys they need to figure out, including Cordero Patterson, including Younghoe Koo, who's a restricted free agent, Foye Oluokun, who's a major piece of their defense. Everywhere they've got questions, and Russell Gage might just, by process of elimination and maybe by cost, not fit into those plans because they have so many holes to fill and only so many dollars to play with because of massive contracts to Matt Ryan and Grady Jarrett and Jake Matthews, among others.
He'll be a good pickup. So as the Lions come in, they haven't won on the road yet. And you just mentioned that the Falcons haven't won at home. So someone's going to have to win at Mercedes-Benz this Sunday. And when you look at that, the Lions, they upset the Arizona Cardinals. They got their first win over a team with a winning record. Falcons still haven't done that. So Dan Campbell, he wants to make the Falcons prepare for DeAndre Swift's return. Do you think that he can make a big impact? And do you see this Atlanta defense stopping him?
If Swift plays, sure. And by the way, you saying that a team has to break this made me automatically think of the absolute possible scenario of a tie. Because so here's the thing. All right, Stephanie, here's the weird thing about this series. The last 3 games in this series, last season, 2017, 2014, have all come down to literally the last second. And they've happened in weird and strange ways. If you remember last year, Todd Gurley fell 6 inches into the end zone and then gave the Lions a chance. The Lions score in the last play of the game. And then they get a penalty. So Matt Prater has to make a 48-yard extra point to win. In 2017, Golden Tate falls into the end zone. They call it a touchdown. They review it. They say it's no touchdown, but they didn't have any timeouts left. So they have a 10-second runoff. Game ends. And the Falcons win. In 2014, I know this is a history lesson here, but in 2014, Matt Prater in London misses a field goal. And here's the thing, delay a game. So he gets a chance to move 5 yards back and take it again, makes it the Lions win and beat the Falcons there. So weirdness happens in this series, Stephanie. So now it's going to be a tie. Like, it's just going to happen. This is just, you've manifested it into the world.
I'm not going to bet on this game, but the Lions, they have placed Jared Goff on the reserve COVID list. So that's coming off of the big win over Arizona. So how have the Falcons been preparing to potentially see Tim Boyle?
You know, I think right now they'll probably prepare for Goff, and they'll prepare more for whatever the offense is. And to what you asked before about DeAndre Swift, I imagine they'll prepare that DeAndre Swift will play. And that's the thing with the Lions from the limited amount I've seen them this year is it doesn't necessarily matter who's in the backfield. They've been getting production. Craig Reynolds last week gains 100 yards. Jamal Williams, really good number 2 back who could be in number 1 many places. And then, a guy like Swift can be dynamic, but you would think even if Swift returns that they're going to manage his workload first game back in a few weeks. So I think they're going to prepare for Goff. They're going to prepare for Swift. And they're going to just prepare more for scheme than anything else because I don't think it's going to change that much, be it Tim Boyle, David Blau, or Jared Goff, and then DeAndre Swift or Jamal Williams or Craig Reynolds. I think this point they feel comfortable in what they're doing, and it's late enough in the season that they're just going to roll with it. And we've seen the one thing we've seen Dan Campbell be in certain situations is very, very aggressive and kind of just go for it. And I would imagine that you see more of that again this week.
We battled 2 first-year coaches. And so Arthur Smith, he's done a pretty good job in his first year considering what he has to take over. We talked about the salary cap, free agency. There's still glaring holes on the roster. You said basically every position could get flipped around. So from your time covering him in Atlanta, how has he been able to get this team to buy in? Because we've seen some other head coaches struggle with that in the first year.
I think he's just really upfront with his guys, and he's honest with them. He calls it a sober-minded approach to basically everything. He says it a lot in press conferences. It's like drilled and ingrained in my head. But that's, I think, how he approaches everything. And he's real with guys. And I think there's an appreciation of that. Like he's not going to mess around. And he's also shown like, hey, if you produce in practice, you will play. And if they're feeling like you're not producing, you will sit, and he will try to find the best matchups to win each week. I think what he's done with Cordero Patterson has really caught the eyes of a lot of people, because Cordero Patterson is a guy that always oozed talent, but no one could ever figure out how to really use him on offense beyond his immense skills as a kick returner. Well, Arthur Smith's figured that out. And to be fair, there's some credit that goes to the Bears there, because the Bears last year are initially the ones that started playing around with him a little bit more as a full-time running back. But then Dave Ragone and Charles London, who were two of the main people who did that in Chicago, came to Atlanta, and that was part of how Patterson ended up in Atlanta. But again, it's all part of that. I think he's making the most of what he has, and understand. And if you look at it and understand the roster, I think that is impressive. I said a few weeks ago, if the Falcons had somehow made the playoffs, and technically they're still alive, so I will stick with this. If they somehow make the playoffs, he should be at least considered, if not be, coach of the year, because of what they've had to work with. And the fact that he was able to take that type of roster, which is reality, like a bottom maybe 6 roster in the NFL, and turn them into a playoff team, that's not bad. And I think people are understanding that, at least within the building. Like, listen, you had X to work with, and he's figuring out ways to get guys to play to the best of their abilities in almost every situation.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things to consider in this offseason, especially with the cap and how many positions they need to fill. Is there another Julio in this year's draft that you think the Falcons could go after, or a younger Ryan in the mix down the road?
Well, I mean, that's the good thing about kind of needing everything, right? You can take whatever the best player available is.
Best guy available.
I'd say, honestly, there were probably – listen, you're not going to draft a long snapper. You're not going to draft a kicker in the first round. You're not going to draft a punter in the first round. By the way, they need a punter too, potentially. Maybe they'll re-sign Thomas Morstead. But you look at it, and they could take any position, I would say probably outside of safety, because I think they're in a pretty decent spot at safety with Jalen Hawkins and Richie Grant as their likely starting safeties next year. Maybe they bring back an Eric Harris or Deron Harmon, or sign another veteran in free agency. Like, I don't think you'll go first round pick there, but if that's the best player on the board, they could, and then move Richie Grant elsewhere. That's the amazing thing about all of it. If they wanted to go corner, well, you need somebody opposite A.J. Terrell. You need linebackers. They desperately need edge rushers. I mean, Dante Fowler is their leading sacker at 4.5 sacks. He's the only edge rusher on their team currently who has more than 1 sack this season. Like, that tells you where they are in terms of pass rush. Offensive line needs some major help. Receiver, we touched on it earlier. You got 2 receivers under contract for next year right now. And running back, who knows what they'll do with Mike Davis. Cordero Patterson is an unrestricted free agent. Quadri Olison's back on the team, but you still maybe need somebody there. And then quarterback, obviously, who knows what's going to happen with Matt Ryan long-term. I would think maybe they wouldn't go quarterback unless they kind of make the decision to move on from Matt Ryan, which I don't think they'll do. But hey, at this point, anything's on the table. So literally they could go anywhere. And that's kind of the beauty of their situation is Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith can literally look at their board, whatever pick they take, say, that's the top guy, and just slide the card right over. Or because they kind of need everything, maybe trade down if there's an option. Again, this is way in the weeds or way too early. and maybe trade and get another pick or two to help facilitate this kind of rebooting that they need to do. And, you know, then you can take maybe 2 guys that are in the top 10 of what you're looking at on your board at that time. Who knows what this will look like, but they have those options because of what, frankly, they're dealing with on their roster right now and the salary cap issues that they've had.
Well, there's been rumors about Mitch Trubisky. Think that could happen?
I have not heard the rumors about Mitch Trubisky. And I mean, as a backup, sure. I don't think that makes sense right now as a starter. But look, they've had Josh Rosen and Felipe Franks as their backups this year. And we'll see if either one of those guys is on the roster next year. One would think that they seem to have a plan for Felipe Franks at this point, because they've used him a little bit on special teams. They were messing around with him as like a tight end, Taysom Hill type earlier in the season. He's been their number 2 quarterback, surpassing Josh Rosen the last couple of weeks. So I don't know. I had not heard the Mitchell Trubisky stuff. And it's still, again, way, way too early for any of that. And even if they brought in a guy like Trubisky, I don't think that they would be doing that as a starter. I think they would do it as, hey, we want to see this guy. Kind of how I feel like they were doing with Rosen this year. Hey, see this guy for a year, see what he has, and see if it's maybe something that down the road, yeah, maybe he becomes the replacement for Matt Ryan, or maybe it's somebody else, because there are multiple ways to build teams. Like there's this philosophy out there in the NFL, like that you have to build through a rookie quarterback. And you can do that, but there are other ways to build. The Tampa Bay Indianapolis model, that was kind of accidental in both ways, but it can work where you build everything
Best
else.
available.
And then but you build everything else and then you get the quarterback last. And since quarterbacks more and more are kind of trying to force their hands, like we saw with Matthew Stafford last year, there are conversations around Aaron Rodgers, conversations around Russell Wilson, that by the time you've got that rest of the team built, maybe there's a guy out there on the last year of his deal and he becomes a veteran guy that you just kind of drop in, like what happened with Tom Brady in Tampa, like what happened with Phillip Rivers, and then with Carson Wentz via trade in Indianapolis. That's another way to build a roster. And listen, in both those cases, it's led to a Super Bowl and playoff berths.
Mm-hmm. So of the players on the roster, who has impressed you the most and who's disappointed you the most?
So it's interesting because at midseason, I would have given probably the answer of Russell Gage as the biggest disappointment, but he's played extremely well. The guy who's impressed me the most is AJ Terrell. It's not even close. He's had a second-year breakout. He's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. He should be a Pro Bowler. If he doesn't make it, that's, to me, maybe the biggest snub. And we don't know what the roster is going to look like when it comes out on Wednesday night, but like, he would be the biggest snub in the entire league if he doesn't make it, more than likely, because he's arguably been maybe the second best cornerback in the NFL, the AFC or NFC, this whole year. Guys can't throw on him. And he's been fantastic. And that's a guy that's, when you're looking at building pieces for the Falcons, that's a spot you have for the future. And like that guy is going to get a whole bunch of money when his contract is up, as long as he keeps on the current trajectory. But he's only a second-year pro, so the Falcons have him for at least, figuring they'll pick up the 5th-year option, at least 3 more years before they even have to figure out a tag situation, unless they try to just extend him. So he will be the first one. Grady Jarrett and Cordero Patterson are the other 2 guys that have just been fantastic this year. Grady Jarrett doesn't get nearly enough credit that he should, but because he's an interior defensive lineman on a bad front 7, but the dude's double teamed and sometimes triple teamed on plays, and he continues to make plays. And when he's in single coverage, he's next to unblockable. The guy's a force. He's great against the run. He gets good enough pass pressure, even though he doesn't have the sack numbers right now to prove it. But he's been great. And then there's only so much that can't be said about Cordero Patterson at this point. He's resurrected the offensive part of his career at age 30. Some of that, as we talked about before, with what Arthur Smith, Dave Ragone, Charles London, and Des Kitchens, the current running backs coach, have done. But he's a little bit of everywhere. This is the most he's been in his career as an offensive option, as a running back. He's got over 1,000 yards from scrimmage. He's got more rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions, rushes than he's had at any point in his career. That's incredible for a 30-year-old. It just is. And then disappointment-wise, Mike Davis has played a little bit better the last couple of weeks, but a lot of people thought he'd be the number 1 back. A lot of people thought maybe be giving the production that Cordero Patterson is, and it just didn't happen. He's run harder. I think some of that's because they've gotten some better blocking, but how he's played compared to what I think a lot of people thought, maybe what even the Falcons were hoping, is not quite, to me, where that's been. And then really the entire front 7, minus Grady Jarrett and minus like Foye Oluokun, has been another disappointment, because they're just not getting pass rush. They're not getting pressure. Like we talked about before, Dante Fowler only has 4.5 sacks. That's leading the Falcons at 15 games into the season. And he missed like 3 games too. So like, I mean, they're just not getting pressure, and that limits what Dean Pease is able to call defensively. It hurts the secondary, because if quarterbacks have a ton of time to throw, they're going to pick apart guys. It means they can't play as much man, even if they wanted to play man, because You don't get pass rush. Man coverage is a nightmare for corners and safeties. So it's really the front seven and Mike Davis that I think have been those struggle points for the Falcons this year.
Mm-hmm. And to finish it off on a high note, what can you say about this team that can give Falcons fans a little bit of hope?
I mean, look at what Arthur Smith's done. We talked about it before. Like they've been in the playoff hunt with a roster that, even if you like the front end, the top line guys, and I do, and I have said that since the beginning, they had no depth. Every one of their depth pieces was a one-year contract guy, an unproven rookie. And yet here they are. They're still theoretically in the playoff hunt. They've been competitive in games with teams that I would say are worse than them or on the same level as them. And that's good. But in the NFL, they've won most of those games. That's why they're here. So when it's an equal footing, Arthur Smith is doing a good job. Dean Pease is doing a good job. So that's a reason to have hope, because you have to figure, as they grow their roster, as they get more talent in the building, as they get more guys who maybe fit what Arthur Smith wants to run, what Dean Pease wants to run defensively, then that puts them in potentially a better place to where you can compete with the Tampa Bays, the Dallases, at least in the NFC, that you might have to worry about down the road in 2022, in 2023, in 2024. So that's something to really believe in. And again, AJ Terrell is another reason to have a lot of hope. And some of the offensive line pieces, although the offensive line has struggled this year. Jake Matthews still a really good player. Chris Lindstrom's a fantastic guard, but he's an offensive guard, so no one really talks about him, right? Those are guys that you can really build around. I'd say they have probably, 6 foundational pieces that they can build around at this point for the next 3 to 4 years, and that's not bad. Jalen Hawkins at safety being another one of those guys. And then we haven't even talked about Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts, Kyle Pitts is having one of the best seasons for a rookie tight end ever. He's right now, I think it's 5th in yards, 4th in receptions among rookie tight ends all time. And that's, I think people are not talking about that as much because expectations were so high on him to start the season, which wasn't fair for rookie tight ends because rookie tight ends always are inconsistent. And what you're seeing from him is a fantastic rookie year. And you can figure with a full year, and again, Arthur Smith figuring out how to use him even more, next year he could end up being a top 2 or 3 tight end in the NFL. He has that type of capability. So that's another reason why, if you're a Falcons fan, you can have some hope, because Kyle Pitts is legitimate. Very, very legitimate, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, teams are making plays around him. So, I mean, anyone who can make an impact like that. But hopefully Smith can figure out a way to make it to the playoffs. Then I agree with you. I think he should be in contention for Coach of the Year. Thanks again for joining me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Yay. Thanks.